I'm at the City of Sydney. That's what I'm doing. I'm helping create the fine grain and the spaces that they're in. And this was a really interesting challenge because to many people, Sydney is a busy, bustling, green, global, connected and enlivened city. And yet there are times when even its busiest places are underutilised. So this is my background, which is talked about, so we won't go into this too much. But this is what my work includes at the City. So it's the Fine Grain Programme, Business 101 seminars, Small Bars Programme, business mentoring and process advice around all of that stuff. So as I said, our place is underutilised at certain times. So Pitt Street Mile at 11 o'clock is busy and bustling in the morning, but 11 o'clock at night, it's pretty underutilised and kind of doesn't feel great as well. And this was the challenge: what did it actually mean to require activation of place, and how could that be defined, and was it true? And because we're seen to be the heart of the city, and was activation actually needed? And yet there were many places in Sydney that, compared with their global partners, that are underutilised. London has its City for Business and West End for entertainment. New York has Wall Street for business and, well, the rest of Manhattan for entertainment. But Martin Place, our business district, was actually located in the heart of our city. And when business was finished, many people just went home and it went awfully quiet, except Friday nights, when the city was busy. And if you wanted to stay for a drink with friends, there were limited options as well. Pub, noisy club, noisy pub even. So where could you go to download for the week? Where could you learn about your colleagues and just have a conversation? So there were many different aspects to activating Sydney, and my role was really to understand the human scale interaction and try to make it work with positive energy. So the Laneways programme was launched in 2008, and actually someone who interviewed me for that job is just walked into the room a little bit earlier, so it's good to see them again. And that was to encourage the small scale activation of place. Our laneways were small scale for sure, but people had the perception that, unlike other cities, they were not particularly welcoming. And in its own way, this reflected Sydney. So Sydney defaults to glamorous, large-scale corporate office blocks on main streets are therefore the norm. They're not human scale and they're not very engaged, and they're very similar to each other. We also own some of the infrastructure on the laneways, and perhaps a conversation with state government that we also owned to claim these spaces where possible. And so we developed the Laneways programme, which started to be implemented in late 2008. And this was launched to activate our hidden spaces, the parts of the city that we could actually influence, and were of human scale and underutilised and could be made more interesting. So it's multifaceted. It included normalisation of these places, initially through engagement with the community through public art. Laneways also became a feature of the Art and About programme, and through programmes such as Live Lanes and By George, people started to talk about laneways. And this kind of got people interested. We also introduced in 2008 Small Bars programme, which was to assist new operators understand the opportunities that existed through changes in the Liquor Act that came into play in August 2008, and basically for the very first time in Sydney allowed the average person to be able to get a liquor licence for $500. We also introduced the Business Development Matching Grant Programme, which was launched for businesses locating in laneway spaces. So we had a programme of public works, which committed to upgrading several laneways in the CBD. And these were all really critical first steps as a part of this. So I have to keep dipping in and out of my glasses. So this are the many layers of this, so like the infrastructure, business mentoring, grants program, and process advice. We also want to encourage new, unique, innovative businesses to the city, and we also realised that opportunities underutilised spaces were not just in laneways, so that's how the Laneways programme then evolved into the Fine Grain programme. And that was to encourage new, unique, innovative, interesting businesses into the underutilised spaces, not just the laneways. So whilst they're the vital connectors, undoubtedly, it wasn't just about filling those spaces, it was about filling the smaller spaces with interesting things to visit as well. And again, this was a multi-layered programme. Amongst other things, it included the existing Art and About programme to make places more interesting. And they added streetwear to the Art and About programme, for example. And this was laneway focused, so streetwear being the laneways of the city. And it's fine. It was a really interesting one for me because, for example, there we were curating graffiti, and it's like for a council, that was a really interesting space to be finding ourselves in. But the Fine Grain programme also included business mentoring and process support. There was match funding, a grant of up to $30,000 at that point, which was safe for match funding. But there were also infrastructure upgrades that responded to business activation and pre-prescribed programs, so upgrading quality of paving, drainage, widening of footpaths, all that really glamorous thing that really makes the city happen. So we had that program in place, and then, this is some of the works of the public art team here that you can see, which, this was a very dark laneway in the middle of Chinatown, and it was about how art could actually make a space happen and make a space interesting. So the business mentoring was, so part of this was about getting business to understand and maximise its opportunity, whilst understanding it also had a responsibility. I speak to more than 200 business operators a year, one-to-one, deliver business seminars, so they're a capacity building program. There are 10 this year, 160 attendees, but we've got more than 1,000 people expressing interest in our last 3, which is going to be interesting to see how that comes along. And I said, small bars program. Another program that we ran was the food trucks. So we ran 2 years of testing to see what could and couldn't be done, because that was in a response to the open questionnaires that were sent out to the people that lived in our city, and they wanted alternative eating options at night, but you're kind of fixed with what's built there and what people want to put in those spaces. And so I'd been reading about food truck awards overseas and how they were using apps, and we try to find some operators to trial that, and we tried that for a couple of years actually, because we then realised they couldn't park anywhere because of restrictions on where on the streets they could park. So it was a case of trying to, trial things, which is always a good word for a council to use, so take note of that one, and just to see without any commitment to any outcome how things worked. So the small bars program, more than 80 small bars have opened across our LGA now. It's astonishing. And 4 of them, from a standing start in 2008, have found themselves in the world's top 50 now. So they're top quality stuff. This one is one of the ones in Bulletin Place in the city. And as you can see, they've garnered global interest. And there's a really great, the Ashes Fans Guide to Sydney's New Drinking Dens was, I think, published in New Year's Eve 2010, and I was actually in London, and I read that was in The Guardian, and I was like, wow, that's, and the first line, which, don't quote me on this, but it comes out of this article, was saying, move over Melbourne, Sydney's now established itself. And it was just like, well, I don't know if that's particularly fair, but I know that some people would have been happy with that outcome. So, this is some of those outcomes that have come out of this, and this is really where the key part of the conversation lies, as far as I'm concerned. These small bars in themselves have created 500 jobs and a turnover of approximately $50 million per annum, and it's difficult to argue with that. An engaging place, what do you get? A place people want to be. Queues outside cafes and bars, which was actually, we were told, would never happen. Happy customers, happy residents, happy operators. So as I was saying, it's multi-tiered, it's people, events, infrastructure, curated programs, activities, they're all Enliven Place. They all have different parts to play. I think that's a critical part of it. And cycleways, which the city gets criticised about a lot, but actually it's that human scale interaction, and I cycle a lot, so I'm obviously going to say that, but as a cyclist, you feel safer in the place, and you kind of engage with the place, and I think that's what people want, that engagement. But there's no one panacea. It's it varies depending on what opportunities you have in your places. So it's, engaging with everyone. It's modern Sydney. It's big and yet it's small. So an artwork in a laneway with a bar next to it was my ideal world outcome, and managed to get them all happening in one place, which was great. Big yet small, compliant yet creative. So this was a bar in an artwork on a laneway too, so it's actually in the artwork, which is great. It was corporate and creative. So, you know, great photo there of Mr. Corporate Man walking past and knitting on a stairwell. And it's just, you know, fascinating that those things happened in the city. And residential yet full of small businesses and opportunity. And that's the mix. I mean, that's obviously what you always face. That's perhaps the area of competition is one person wants a quiet place, another person wants a busy place, but that quiet place is, the person wants a quiet place also wants somewhere to go, you know, and that's why they live in the city. So it's about engaging with everyone. So modern city, it's, you know, for me, it's a global city with its hearts in place. It's all of these things. It's and there was also, you know, there is costs. There was financial costs. Cities had $13.5 million for 9 laneway upgrades, and those laneway upgrades are still going on. You know, they're the ones that we decided that we wanted to do up front. But there's also been money kept aside to respond to what businesses were actually doing, because you can never dictate what that's going to be. The Fine Grain Grants Programme spent $250,000 approximately over 5 years, but generated $1.623 million in infrastructure upgrades. And again, it's difficult to argue with those numbers. And that in itself has generated 100 jobs and $30 million worth of revenue per annum. And that's it. They've included some of those businesses that are located on those laneways have been not just bars, but Japanese tea house and an art gallery. It's kind of where I'm at on this kind of stuff. I mean, for me, there's, you know, there is a cost, and that cost is sometimes financial, but it's also, you get people that kind of saying, well, you know, do we want this in our place? But yes, you do, because you choose to live in a city, and, you know, you're here for a reason, and that reason is activity. And it's the smaller scale stuff that really has made a difference, I think. You know, the fact that we talk about small business in hidden places is important, because those businesses are surviving. We talk about small bars, which encourages the reciprocation of the conversation. When you talk about small bars, new operators feel confident about coming in and maybe opening one themselves. So it's just about keeping that conversation alive. Art and About gave hidden spaces more appeal, more aesthetic, confident places to maybe open a bar in. And so engage with people that were really passionate about this. As you know, as you've heard here, I didn't have any council experience prior to taking on this role. I had DA experience, wasn't with the City of Sydney, but it wasn't positive. So I've been really quite keen to be in that place and understand that, you know, how we interact with those people is really they're going to become our advocates once they get out there, if it's a very positive interaction. And generally that's how it's been. I think if you spoke to any of the businesses that we've worked with during the time that the programme's been alive, yes, they have issues. Yes, sometimes things don't quite go as according to plan. But, you know, the positive interactions are really where the advocacy comes from. And then as businesses and people then start advocating for things, all of those barriers start disappearing and things become a lot easier. But it is about understanding. It's about very many levels. And it's actually a two-way conversation is the other critical part of this, as in, I've had to say to many businesses that they can't do things. You know, there's that experience, oh, you've got a small bars program, I want to open a small bar. And it's like, yeah, but you can't really do that in your lounge, you know? And it's about understanding that there are things that they have to do. And that actually happened. I did have somebody come and say, I've got a great lounge room here in Surrey Hills, and there's a lot of people, and I want to open a bar, you know? And it is about, you know, those kinds of conversations. And it's funny, those people that when we had the objections at the start, when they go to sell their house, the very first thing I notice on the billboard is, located near all the city's cool small bars. And that's kind of like, I'd like to leave you with that thought, because that's been the most difficult part of this, was getting more licensed premises out there. It was, you know, the pain to get the gain, but the gain's very definitely there. And I think now, as I look at Sydney and look at what the city is, and I see a very different city now to when we started this work 5 or 6 years ago, you know. And that's my 1 minute sign. Thank you very much.